Okay, let's take a look at version 2.4 of the code and some of the new features that it brings to us, and also some of the bugs that it fixed. Okay, let's take a look at the charger. So let's get familiar with all the operational controls first. So first we're going to turn the thing on, which is the switch towards the back next to where the cord is. EEPROM version and then code version are shown momentarily, and then it goes to your standard display, which is really two sets of information. First one is the battery volts and the charge current. When the charger is not connected to anything, there'll be a small residual reading on the battery voltage, mainly because you got an open input to the amplifier. That's not a factor to worry about. The second information screen is actually more important. You have the reason for the charge to stop or start. It tells you whether the charge is happening, what's going on. Basically, not in this case, it's not charging. It gives you the car profile and the run mode you've selected in case you've selected something previously and forgot to modify it for this particular charge sequence. Easy control. So we're going to start off by going to the bottom line. Okay, and then you're going to go to the top line. It basically lets you select which line of information you're going to be using. I'm going to scroll, and you'll see that the list of variables at the top are all the ones that give us information about what's happening and what did happen. And it's a circular buffer. Now this is the cycle information from the two memory banks. And then you go right back to battery volts. If you want to go the other way and get right to your information about the last charge, you just push to the right, or left, I'm sorry, and now you'll see bank 1, cycle 3, 2, 1, bank 0, cycle 3, 2, and 1. Now in this particular special mode of the display, the down arrow gets you not to the bottom line but to information about that event. And we'll get into that quite a bit later on when we go into looking how we can use the cycling to give information about the condition of the battery. Right now I mainly want you to understand that this is a circle. The list of variables is one big long line, and all of the ones on the top line are only information. You can't change anything, you can't edit anything in that top line. Now we're back to the base one, which is your battery voltage. So let's go to the bottom line now. And what you'll see there is that you're starting off with the same list of variables. So I'll go back to number 1, which is battery volts. And then we'll work our way through. Now you notice while I'm pressing buttons, that alternate display doesn't come in. But if I wait long enough, then you'll get that second message. Very important messages are the R code tells you why the charger stopped or why the discharge stopped, and that's, since there's so many reasons that the charge can stop, all the safeties and so forth, it's very important to know why it actually stopped in order to make a determination as to whether it charged properly or not. So let's go to the bottom line again. And now we're going to go through the whole list, and I'll describe them as we go through them. And be aware that because we're not connected to a harness or a battery, things like the temperature display and the voltage will be wrong. 140 is the maximum temperature the charger can read. So with nothing connected, that's what you're going to see on the bottom line. So you've got outlet temperature, inlet temperature. This is the difference between the two temperatures. PTC value is this thermal sensing strip that's along the side of the batteries. This sensing strip can see a temperature rise on a single cell, and it's very important to use this on the Insight and the first-gen Civics. On the second-gen Civics and the Priuses, we don't have this particular temperature sensor, so we simply fool it by placing a 20 ohm resistor across the inputs. It's required. If that resistor is not there, the charger will shut down due to overtemp because it thinks the PTC strips are too hot. Okay, next one is more informational displays, just like the top line. Charge time. How long did the charge run? How long did you spend during that charge in the topping zone? how long did it discharge for? This is a very important number for measuring capacity, because as the battery discharges into a constant load, a good battery will run the load much longer than a bad battery. So this is a number we can use to see if things are getting better or getting worse, or not changing at all, and compare one pack to the other. Start charge voltage, end charge voltage, start discharge voltage, end discharge voltage. Let's go back to this end discharge voltage. The discharge is going to be stopped based on a couple of different reasons, and again, it gives you an R code up in that upper left corner, so that you can see why it stopped. If the minimum discharge voltage was reached, you can be pretty happy because the pack tracked all the way down without a cell dropping out. The deeper that can go, the better the pack is, but be aware that safety is there to prevent over discharging. And while we're talking about discharging, these cells can be reversed for, I did one where I reversed it for 14 hours with a reverse charge of 1 amp, and then I put it in, recharged it and put it in service with a battery that had not been reversed, and I saw no difference that I could measure between the two cells' performance when used in series like they are in a pack. So a momentary or a short-term reversal isn't going to kill the battery, and a deep discharge will bring capacity back to the battery. So this end discharge voltage that you reach, if it reaches your minimum voltage, that means that the pack ran that load all the way down until it started dropping off, and it stopped for reaching the minimum voltage. If it drops out at a higher voltage, like 145, like the video we're going to do later, we have cells that are dropping out, or sticks that have low capacity compared to the rest of the pack, and we need to identify those and remove them from the pack if we're going to recover capacity. So that's why the discharge is important. The charge balances all the cells at a full 100% state of charge, but the capacity can still be skewed. The weaker cells will respond and recover somewhat their capacity when you deep cycle them, and that's the purpose of the discharger. It's the discharge so that the weakest of all the cells gets the biggest discharge, and then on subsequent charges and discharges, other cells will get their deep discharge, and eventually all the sticks will have been cycled through their whole voltage range, and we'll see where the pack sits at the end of that process. Okay, so the next item on our list is last charge milliamp hours, last charge watt hours, and now we're into the variables with the asterisk. Car profile is one of the variables that we will theoretically want to change, especially if you have more than one car. If you have only one car, this is going to be set one time and then you'll never touch it again. So the way the car profile works is you're selecting a group of variables that you're going to call car profile 1. If you hit the edit button, you're in the mode where you can change this. Now you notice the top line changed from being information about the last charge to being specific information about what car profile we've got selected. If you hit the up arrow to raise the, you'll see that you now got a second 2001 Insight. We preset these things to the various cars, and you can just use that profile if you desire, or you can change car profile 1 to reflect the same information as the other ones that we have as our defaults, and you can know how to set them from there. So the Civic, HCH2, and Prius, and second gen Insight, and 7 goes back to 1 because we only have 6 memory locations for that. So we're going to just leave it on profile number 1, which just happens to be a first gen Insight, and we'll show you how you can change what the name of the car is and the parameters for that very shortly. When you're finished editing, you hit edit display again, and it gets you back to your regular mode where you're seeing the alternate displays. So let's go to the next item, which is cutback VP1. Now this is part of profile 1. VP1 means voltage profile 1. If we go to the next item, you'll see charge stop VP1, and then you'll see model year 1. These are the three parameters that you set up to identify the car. Now in this case we had set it up for a 2000 Insight, but let's say we want to make it read a 2006 Insight. You'd simply raise the 1 is the indication that tells you that you're on an Insight. Let's see if I can do this from upside down here. So this identifies it as an Insight, and then the next 2 digits identify the year. So let's set it to 6. Enter. Display. Okay, and now if we hit edit again to identify what that top line will say. Oh, I'm in model year, sorry about that. So now if I go back to the car profile for 1 and hit enter, we'll see it's a 2006 Gen 1 Insight rather than a 2000 like we had before. So this is how you set up the profiles so that they give you information about the actual car you're hooking it to help you remember what 1, 2, 3, and 4 is. And again, if you've only got one car, you can just set this to identify your car and not ever have to go into car profile again. Now it's important here to get clear on the fact that the car profile in this case is just another one of the variables in this long list. Car profile, VP1, and I'll just scroll through here to give you an idea of how many they are. We just got through all 6 car profiles here. This is the last one. And now we're into amp hour capacity. Now we're into run mode, which we'll get into. And here's a bunch of more parameters. We're going to go all the way through the list. Password is the last one. Now you're back to battery volts. So as we go through, I'm holding the button. It's very important to see. I'm just holding the button and it will scroll automatically for you. So that saves you a lot of up and down pressing. You just push and hold the button until it gets to the one you want. So right now we're on car profile 1. But because it's just part of a list of variables, we wanted a shortcut, because most of the time when you want to set up your car, you want to go right to the particular car setup and be able to get going. So I'm going to shut this off again and come back on again, so you'll see where your start position is. Now if this sounds nice and quiet, it's because I disabled the fans for this video so that you can hear what I'm saying. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the setup button. Now the setup is your way to get a quick setup so you can go ahead and do your charge. So in this case, the first thing it does is take you right to that car profile number 1 variable in the list. So we jumped right from battery volts over to car profile, and at that point you could edit the car profile, and we won't just leave it the way it is, and it leaves you there on the variable list. Okay, now you're still in setup. Whenever you hit setup, it's important that you stop afterwards, and I say that because in a little further into the setup, you'll see that the up and down arrow keys take on a new meaning when you're in setup. So for now, let's just stick to the main menu, and we'll get back to this a little bit later on. So right now I'm going to continue through the list. What I wanted to show you is that, let's go back to the bottom line here, that in this list of variables is things like run mode and car profile. You can get to them this way by just going to them like that, and then you can edit them, or you can hit the shortcut, which is the setup key, and the first button on the setup key gets you into car profile first time you press it. Now the setup key has 3 positions. First one is to allow you to set the car profile if you want to. The second one is your options display, and it will scroll to this message here where you have a bunch of zeros. If you scroll to the right, it tells you on the top line what you're looking at. These are basically switches that you can turn on or off to get different functions. Extra soak time is a very important one. first charge you do on a pack that's been sitting for a while, you're going to want to soak it. So you press this button, and then you hit stop to get out of setup. Now if you push the run button or the start button and you were connected to the car, the first charge would proceed completely to the end of the topping time, which is set for 900 minutes. And this allows the pack to thoroughly get even the weakest, lowest capacity cells to full, and everybody's at 100% state of charge when this process is over. This is the point where you'd like to do your discharge cycles and also give the pack a chance to be discharged and then recharged several times. And this helps to bump the capacity of the weaker cells back up by giving them a deeper cycle. So the setup is a shortcut. You hit it. First thing you can do is change your car profile. If you're not interested in changing that, you press it again, and then it switches right over to your options display. Now, if I turn the charger off and back on again, this extra soak time will go back to its default of 0. The next item, bank select, this is where the cycle charge and discharge information is stored. You saw that earlier when we were looking at the top line of the display. Now, if you press this down, you're going to, from that point on, always retain bank 1 as your position. So let's just turn it off for the heck of it, right in the middle of this. First, let's hit stop. So now we've basically turned on soak and we've turned on bank 1. The reason you want 2 banks is so you can get some history data stored. The first time you do your charge or discharge, or when you feel like you've given it as a good an exercise as you can, you may want to save that in bank 0 so that you can, in subsequent charge-discharge cycles, you can look back at the results of the first one and see how things are changing. To do that, you set that bank 1 on. Now when I turn the charger back on again, it will forget that the soak was turned on, because this isn't something you want to inadvertently do because it takes so long and it's a fairly deep process. So let's go back to setup immediately. You'll see that the option for the bank select right here is still turned on. It remembered that from one power up to the next. It also remembers your temperature in degrees Fahrenheit or centigrade. So those 2 things, if they're set to on, will be retained when your next power comes on. Now, this is the bug that was we didn't know we had, was the retention of this information. In all of the earlier code that was released as part of the second build and any of the upgrades that were done, these variables will be forgotten rather than remembered. So for now, get your code updated to 2.4, which is a free process. If you've paid for an upgrade or if you have a new charger, I'll be shipping these out to you sometime soon, and I would just hope that you can send me back the old chip when you install it, and that'll correct this bug in the software. Okay, so these variables are the important switches. Now I'm going to put it back to Fahrenheit just because I'm familiar with that. And since this is not going to be the first charge, we're going to put it into bank 0. And since it's also going to be the first charge, we're going to want to have extra soak time on. But as you can see, when you power off, this goes away. So this is a variable that has to be turned on right before you do the charge. And when you turn the power off, when you're done, it will go back to the default of 0. So let's look at what the other ones are here. Okay, bank 0, bank 1 select. Cold charge. Last year when we first released this charger, we were putting it out at a time of year when it was pretty cold in a lot of locations, and people found that they couldn't charge because the minimum charge voltage or charge temperature that we allowed was too high, and their So when we have a cold temperature situation, we've added a variable that basically reduces the voltage that the temperature that the car will charge at by 10 degrees. So if you select this, instead of it being about 42 degrees, it drops it to 32 degrees and allows you to make a decision if it's too cold to charge. Now, if it's below 32 degrees, we'll again stop you from charging. So this basically just gives you 10 degrees of leeway so you can make a call as to whether you want to risk it or not. Next one is the serial charge only, and this is serial always when it's turned on. This is only for the serial output port. If you don't have anything connected to that, you don't need to worry about these at all. If you do, this determines how frequently it's going to, which mode it's going to update in. If it's in the default, only when the charge is running will it send data over the serial port. If you turn this flag on, it will output serial data always, even when the pack is just sitting. This might be good as a way to determine the condition of the pack while it's discharging or just self-discharging. Okay, the next one is TechEdit off or on. If you try to edit this and you don't have the password in, it takes you right to the password entry part of your variable list. And if you enter it, invalid password, it gives you another try. If you want to get out of that, you just hit stop. And it takes you back to the screen where you started from. So basically you enter your password at that point and it will take you into the TechEdit mode where some more variables appear on this bottom line. We'll get into that much more detail later on when we start using it. Okay, so is your TechEdit. The next one is degrees, temperature, Fahrenheit, centigrade, and this one is one of the ones that is remembered from power up to power up. You have the ability to set the serial reporting for 1-minute reports or for 5-second reports. If you're going to do discharge charge cycles, the 5-second reports gives you more information during that critical dropout stage. If you want to keep your data file fairly short, you'd leave it on the 1-minute data. And the final one is your charge before discharge. Normally we expect during the cycling, so if you say go in mode 6, it will try to do a charge before it discharges unless the battery is fully charged and it detects that. But most of the time it will want to do a charge first in order to assure that your pack is starting at a fully charged condition, so that when the discharge proceeds, all of the test and rate of change things work properly. So either you've charged it the night before with a soak charge and now you want to do your discharge, or you want to immediately go right into a discharge. You turn the no pre-charge on, and then within a fairly wide degree of voltages, it will go ahead right into a discharge at this point. So this is a way of disabling the charge first before you discharge. And we press the setup key one final time, and now you go into the final of the 3 modes for the setup. This is where if you hit the right arrow right now, all of the default values for the charger have been activated. Now when you turn it back on again, it updates the code, updates all the variables, and now you've basically got back to ground zero like the variables when I sent them to you. And that way there you can recover if you pushed the wrong buttons and you weren't sure what you did. Now the final button down here, the test button, will not work unless you're in the TechEdit. But it has many functions. We'll go into those when we actually start using it. So the main thing is you got a start button, you got a stop button. You can start a charge if you're not hooked up to a battery or you have no PTC sensor. It'll beep at you and it won't stop beeping. You have to hit acknowledge the alarm and hit stop. Okay, so hook up it to a battery, press start, and off you go. Now the way it's going to operate at that point is based on your run mode. Your run mode has, as we talked about earlier, no delay, high current. Oops, do that again. Oh, I gotta push the run mode again. Edit. Okay, so if I hit edit on run mode, it shows on the top line what I'm selecting. Low current, no delay, delay, high current, delay, low current. So you basically pick what you wanted. Now here's discharge cycles. Now the thing to remember is these are non-volatile. Once you set run mode 6, it's going to want to do run mode 6 every time. So always check your run mode. Always check your setup to make sure you're on the correct profile and you got the right switches turned on. And then you simply press go and it'll start charging. You press the start button. Now pause allows you during the course of a charge to pause the charge. And it doesn't forget anything. And then when you hit start again, it recovers right from where you stopped. But this is if you had something wrong or you wanted to adjust something or change something, that lets you do it there. Another thing you can do is during the charge you can actually push the edit display in order to give you access to the bottom line variables, and then you need to edit one of those variables in order to get back to your regular display, and we'll show that while we're doing a charge later on. So that's the basic operation. You basically should be understanding how to change lines with these up and down arrows, and when you're in the setup mode, how those arrows have a different function where you're toggling bits on and off, and you need to hit stop in order to get out of that. Those are the things that mess up most people. And then it's really just a matter of making sure you got the variables set right for what you're trying to do, and off you go. Now we're going to go into using the charger to diagnose a pack.